Hey guys, it's Sam from Sammy's Reviews, and today I'm here to talk about my absolute favorite thing to talk about in the entire world. If you know me, you know that I do not shut up about Haruki Murakami. He's my favorite author, his books are my favorite books, and I do not miss a chance to recommend him to everyone. It's just Murakami and I, we click. When I read his books, I just feel something that I do not ever feel while reading other books. His language is just speaking to me. The way he describes his characters, the way he builds his novels, and the way he just explains the human condition. It's just when I'm reading his books, I feel like I'm in the right place at the right time. So, in this video, let me just break it down to you. We will be talking about a brief background about Haruki Murakami. We're gonna talk about the predominant themes in most of his novels, and then we're going to talk briefly about each and every single works, the novels, the short stories, and the non-fiction books. And finally, we're going to be talking about his write style and how he structures his novels. So back in 1949 in Kyoto, Haruki Murakami was born. He was born after the devastating events of the Second World War. So, as you can imagine, the impact the war had on people. It was devastating, sad, depressing, and everyone was just left confused and overwhelmed. Murakami's parents are both literature teachers, and he studied drama in the University of Waseda in Tokyo. After finishing his college, Haruki Murakami decided to open a jazz bar with his wife Yoko. Ironically, this is the name of John Lennon's wife, and the Beatles are Haruki Murakami's favorite band of all time. We're gonna get to that because the Beatles scored the highest number of references in Haruki Murakami's novels. One of the main themes that Haruki Murakami enjoys to tackle in his novels is music. Running a jazz bar in Tokyo and being obsessed with Western music, Murakami never fails to incorporate music in every single piece of work that he writes. Some of his novels and short stories are even titled after singles or albums or bands. We have Drive My Car, we have Norwegian Wood, and he has an entire book called Absolutely on Music. Let me show you. That one right there. Murakami always draws similarities between his free flow writing and the development of music. Most of his characters are either readers or music fanatics. One of my favorite quotes that Haruki Murakami ever said is, "I have learned so many things from music about writing. I think there are three important elements: rhythm, harmony, and free improvisation. I learned these things from music, not from literature. And when I started writing, I tried to write as though I were playing music." In his famous non-fiction book, What I Talk About When I Talk About Running, Murakami first felt like he wanted to be a writer in 1978 during a baseball game where he claims that a divine force just came to him and he felt like he wanted to be an author. That's pretty vague and metaphoric, and this is exactly why I love Murakami. However, from my guessing with two literature parents and his obsession with Western culture in general, no wonder he wanted to be a writer. And ever since this divine moment during the baseball game, Murakami ever since has been a writer for 4 decades straight. Which brings us to the second theme. Now, let's just get this straight. His themes are always thought-provoking and widely ranged, from love, death, suicide, individuality, postmodernism, and consciousness. My favorite theme Haruki Murakami writes about is postmodernism. When I used to be in college, I was a literature major, and my favorite era to read about, to understand, was postmodernism. I think we still live in the postmodernism era. According to Wikipedia, postmodernism is an intellectual stance or mode of discourse defined by an attitude of skepticism. So, let's just break this down. Basically, after 2 world wars, man could not function normally. People learned what they can do, how they can kill, how they saw blood, fascism, Nazism, tyranny, holocausts, nuclear bombs, and how they witnessed technology arising. Man was just overwhelmed and confused with all this acquired knowledge. He became skeptical and doubtful towards any and everything. Religion, science, faith, everything. This new feeling of fear, alienation, isolation, overwhelmness has eaten up people and left them like just empty vessels. And this is exactly how Haruki Murakami's characters feel like. They're just empty canvases with no thoughts, ideas, opinions, nothing. All they do are just empty canvases for other people to project their own feelings and beliefs and thoughts onto them. His characters have no hopes, dreams, identities. They're just there to reflect other characters. And they all lack in emotions. They don't feel extreme emotions. They are just cold-hearted and empty. So, as I told you, in 1978, during the baseball game, Haruki Murakami just felt the power that he can write. And a year later, in 1979, he published his first novel. Not so much a novel because it's this big, but it is Here the Wind Sings. A year later, he published another tiny novel called Pinball. In 1982, when he published his first, what I like to call, real novel, A Wild Cheap Chase, one of my favorite novels, because it's just more of his style. Deemed him as a legit author and put him on the map. A Wild Cheap Chase is a noir detective story of a man trying to find a sheep with a birthmark. Let's just keep it at that. His first 3 works of art, Hear the Wind Sing, Pinball, and A Wild Cheap Chase, were later on called the Rat Trilogy. And the name is not arbitrary because there is a rat character that frequently comes up in the 3 novels. 3 years later, in 1985, he published Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World, which is a surreal and weird novel handling the topic of the end of the world. And after the publication of this novel, Murakami was well known, he was loved, he was famous, and all of these feelings made him feel overwhelmed. So he left Japan, where he was most known, and fled to Europe. When he was settled down in Europe, he got his muse back and he published Norwegian Wood in 1987. Norwegian Wood is, when you just tell people Haruki Murakami, they associate him with Norwegian Wood. It's his most accessible, easygoing, and simple novel. I personally, and if you saw my first Haruki Murakami video, people usually recommend Norwegian Wood for non-Murakami readers. However, I don't believe that this novel is a well representation of Haruki Murakami. There's just so little of his mojo and magic in this novel that I would recommend any other novel over it. It's just stripped down of all the characteristics that makes Murakami Murakami. When the novel came out, it was labeled as a romantic novel. And of course there is a resemblance of that, but I just think that it's just so much more than that. It follows a boy who is nostalgic and recalls his past relationships with 2 different girls. And this novel was adapted into a very successful movie, which I think captivates the essence. I highly recommend it. A year later, in 1988, Dance, Dance, Dance was published. Dance, 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 or The Rat Number 4, is actually a continuation of the Rat Trilogy. And as you can see, Murakami was very consistent with his writing. And in 1992, he published South of the Border, West of the Sun, which follows a man and a woman who were separated a long time ago but later reunite, and there is a debate whether they should reignite their path or continue living their current lives. After being almost a decade away from Japan, Murakami decided to go back to Japan in 1995 after the Kobe earthquake, and he published Wind Up Bird Chronicles. This novel started out as a short story in one of his short story collections, but later on he liked the idea so much that he made it almost 500-page novel. This novel handles very heavy themes of war and post-war and war crimes in general committed by the Japanese in China. Sputnik Sweetheart, probably my least favorite Haruki Murakami novel, was published in 1999, which follows a search for a missing person, and it tackles a lot of emotional themes: unfulfilled love, postmodernism, and finding your individuality. In 2002, my favorite Haruki Murakami novel, Kafka on the Shore, was published. Now, this is Haruki Murakami's masterpiece. It's just a capsule or a compressed form of all Haruki Murakami's magic. Every single thing about this novel is just insane. It's breathtaking, it's thought-provoking. It leaves you needing and wanting more. It follows Kafka, a runaway 15-year-old kid who escapes his father, and it follows Nakata, an old man with the shining, if you will, or a man who did not recover from the results of the war, and he's left with something a little bit off. Some might call it a little bit of magic. A lot of people consider Kafka on the Shore a loose retelling of Oedipus King, and I can see that, but it's just far-fetched. And in 2004, After Dark was published, and this is the very first novel I read for Haruki Murakami. It's so sweet and short and easygoing and simple, but at that time, when I read it, I felt something weird. What was I reading back then was just young adult, simple novels, and when I read this novel, I felt like, why have I not been reading these types of novels? It's a quick short novel that follows people after dark or after midnight. What goes on in the streets when everyone else is sleeping? In 2010, my second favorite Haruki Murakami novel, 1Q84, was published. Now, 1Q84 title is heavily influenced by 1984 by George Orwell. And actually in Japanese, both the letter Q and the number 9 are pronounced the same, so you can call the novel 1984 or 1Q84. Now, this is a 1,000 plus huge beast of a book that follows Omami and Tingo in two parallel worlds, both searching for something as fate brings them together to find out what is real and what is not. In 2013, Haruki Murakami published Colorist Sakura Tazaki and His Years of Pilgrimage. It follows a character who got rejected from his friend group, and he's set to understand why was he rejected, and he wants to confront his own past. In 2018, Killing Commendatore, or what I like to call the most beautiful book ever published. Let me show you why. I hope this is translated well on camera. It's a beautiful book. It's humongous. And that's not the cool part. When you open it, you actually find as if it's a color palette of an artist, because this actually follows a painter. Very cool. It follows a painter that just got a divorce, who takes off and rents another painter's house in a search of like this spark that can get him back into the painting world. Kind of a healing process. Aside being an excellent novelist, Haruki Murakami is an even better short story writer. So, actually what got me into Haruki Murakami before reading After Dark was reading An Elephant Sitting Still short story. When the movie first came out, I wanted to read the short story. It was only 13 pages and I felt like I should be reading it before watching the movie. And when I did, I got hooked almost immediately. His short stories are just so well written. It lingers after it's done. It leaves you with so many questions. And this is not just like one or two stories. I've read lots of short stories by Haruki Murakami, and each and every single one is just so well written. In his short story collection Men Without Women, Haruki Murakami writes 7 short stories about the impact women have on men's lives. But he made it extra weird with like vanishing cats, mysterious women, and of course incorporating the Beatles. In my favorite short story collection, The Elephant Vanishes, it has all sorts of bizarre ideas. A woman's lack of sleep, a couple robbing a McDonald's, a man observing his favorite elephant vanishing into thin air, a young woman is irresistibly in love with a green monster. All of these ideas are just what makes Haruki Murakami a wizard. And don't get me wrong, all of these are explainable, all of these are metaphors for something so much bigger, something that words cannot speak, so metaphors can. After the Quake is a collection of 6 short stories set during the devastating time of Kobe earthquake, when Japan was really affected by this depressing time. Blinding Willow, Sleeping Woman is a short story collection made up of 24 short stories. Basically covers the broad spectrum called human condition or human experience. And finally, and most recently, he wrote first person singular, 8 short stories from the first person point of view. Some might say it's from the point of view of Murakami himself, or as he calls himself in the novel, the lonely man. Some of the short stories recalls the past, and other short stories talks about adulthood, and it has one of my favorite short stories written by Murakami, Cream. This specific short story collection really stuck with me, and imagining that Haruki Murakami is the voice behind this narrative gives it an extra layer of fragility and vulnerability. Moving on onto his non-fiction books, what I talk about when I talk about running is kind of a diary or a personal journal for Haruki Murakami, where he combines his love for running and his love for writing, and how similar and different these two habits are. It's kind of a collection of memories that Haruki Murakami recalls, how he developed his passion for writing, when did he open up the jazz bar with his wife, how his obsession with marathons arose, and a little fun fact, what I talk about when I talk about running's title is actually after Raymond Carver's short story, what I talk about when I talk about love. His second non-fiction book is Underground, which is about the aftermath of a gas attack in 1995 in Tokyo, where Haruki Murakami just sets these interviews with all the victims or the witnesses that were there during the event. And in this book, you kind of understand how Haruki Murakami did not just want to be an overlooker, how he wanted to be involved in the situation, and he wanted to know every single detail that these victims felt to help him understand their experiences. Another non-fiction book, and a book that really highlights his obsession with music, is Absolutely All Music: Conversations with Seiji Ozawa. This is a deeply personal and intimate conversation between Haruki Murakami and the former conductor of Boston Symphony Orchestra, where he gets really comfortable and really explains his adoration and admiration towards music and how music helped him become Haruki Murakami. Now, as you can see, I did not tell you a lot about the plot of the novels, or I didn't get into the details of the short stories, and simply because there are no details, there is almost no plot. Haruki Murakami, unlike Stephen King, does not focus on plot, actions, rising actions, falling actions. He doesn't just make his characters move from point A to B to C. That's not how he works. Haruki Murakami focuses on details. Like when I ask you after finishing Haruki Murakami years later, what was this novel about? You will not remember, but you will remember a certain scene, a certain conversation, a certain smell that he made you feel, a sound that he made you imagine. Because this is what makes Haruki Murakami special. He focuses on the little tiny things that makes us human, the little things that makes us feel the human condition, the human experience. Haruki Murakami speaks perfect English, and he actually translated a lot of Scott Fitzgerald's novels, Raymond Chandler and J.D. Salinger. However, he explains that he's not so comfortable writing his own novels in English, and he would rather prefer to write them under his mother's tongue. His translators and longtime collaborators, J. Rubin and Philip Gabriel, explained that they consistently refer back to Haruki Murakami when translating his works to make sure that every single word is exactly how he wanted to convey. Haruki Murakami's writing style is captivating and always keeps you wrapped up in questions and theories. He uses such a free-flowing writing style, and as he said, and quoting him, "I do not research when I write novels because imagination is my asset. I want to work it fully." Now, when I say all of these things, people might imagine that his writing style is pretty sophisticated and engulfed with such complicated and complex vocabulary, but it's the complete opposite. Haruki Murakami's novels are very easygoing, very simple, which is something unique because writers often choose to flex the writing muscle and use sophisticated language, like James Joyce, for example. Murakami, on the other hand, he hails simplicity. Simplicity in the language, simplicity in the plot, or simplicity in drawing his characters. He does not care about the bigger image. He cares about the tiny little details that makes up his novel. He cares about transferring a feeling or an emotion or a momentary realization through conversations and monologues. He kind of holds the reader's hand as a way to help them connect with his characters on a much deeper level. Sometimes when I read Haruki Murakami, I learn that I feel a certain feeling. Like, he explains a certain feeling and I suddenly feel like I've always felt this feeling, but no one just put this feeling onto words. His books are full of metaphors and allegory, like Nakata speaking to cats, or a sky that has two moons. all of this magic, instead of being so far from our real life, it actually gets us closer to who we are as people. I know this sounds bizarre and somewhat weird, but actually, in order to understand ourselves, we need to look at our life in kind of a magical way. Basically, Haruki Murakami invites you to be free. Free with your thoughts, free with your emotions, and free in general while reading his novels. He helps you on your search of who you are. All of his characters are either searching for themselves, searching for a person, searching for an emotion, searching for a meaning, a purpose, a goal, a dream. Searching is such an important theme in Haruki Murakami's works of art. There is always something lost, someone lost, just like in real life. And with that search, he helps you to find yourself and helps you to identify who you are and what is your place in the world. Isn't this the meaning of individuality? Knowing who you are, knowing what is your purpose, and knowing how to attain this purpose. This is just a snippet of the magic that Haruki Murakami made me feel. I hope I translated well onto you guys. I hope I was able to showcase my admiration and deep respect to Haruki Murakami. Tell me what is your favorite Haruki Murakami novel in the comments down below, and thank you so much for watching. See you. Bye.